Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session Hybrid Cloud Deployment Approaches for SAP S/4HANA at our SAP Insider 2021 Finance and SAP S/4HANA virtual event. During this session, please enter all your questions into the live Q&A box that you can find to the right of your screen. I am very happy to introduce our guest today, Michael Love, the IBM SAP Global Alliance Technical Leader for IBM. I'm sure that you're all very eager to get started. So Michael, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks very much, Laura. So to get started, just to cover a little bit about myself, I've been with IBM for roughly 20 years. During that time, the majority of that time, I have worked with SAP as a business partner. I'm currently the technical leader in North America for the overall partnership and alliance between IBM and SAP. My particular passion in what I do is first, I would say that I do truly believe that SAP ERP is the best application platform in the industry, especially for medium to large businesses. But in my experience, I find that in many cases, it is not being implemented in a way to actually drive the greatest amount of value out of the platform. So my particular passion is implementing SAP in a way that leads to return on investment and realizes the full value of the SAP application suite. So what I plan on covering today are specifically S/4HANA deployment decisions, specifically in the context of hybrid cloud. And I've broken the slides down into this bulleted form of deployment choices, right? So when you're looking at deploying SAP, one, you can choose between on-premise or a cloud provider. If you choose a cloud provider, picking which cloud provider. The cloud privacy model, right? Whether you are, deploying to a public cloud versus a private cloud, the cloud virtualization model, the hardware platform, application customization and extension model, and then finally the application infrastructure. Whether you want your SAP environment to be managed, right, or if you want to do the management yourself. Before we get into that, I did just want to cover, the overall goal of where we are trying to get clients to, what we believe is, the future steady state for SAP environments, right? And that future, the new normal is the hybrid, multi-cloud, and open, right? So open where you're based on as much open technology as possible, right? With which reduces lock-in. Hybrid, the first context of hybrid is that you typically can't move your entire SAP application suite from on-prem to the cloud in one step, right? Not to mention the fact that SAP typically integrates to, dozens or hundreds of other, on-prem systems, right? And that you often can't move SAP as well as the systems that SAP integrates to from on-prem to the cloud in one step. So the reality of everything that we do in our advice to SAP customers is to make recommendations that allow clients to move SAP from on-prem to the cloud in pieces, right? Not as one single step, but also to be able to maintain flexibility and performance, data privacy, data security, while doing that in a piecewise sense. And that's what's really hard to do. If it was moving everything in one step, all that would be pretty easy, but doing it in pieces without compromising any of your performance or security, that's what's hard. And then finally, the last note is multi-cloud. What we are seeing out there is that it's impossible to choose one cloud provider, right, for all of your needs. So in many cases, we see clients will use, for instance, Azure or Google or Microsoft for building out their internet applications. Let's say a web server or a mobile application, things that are already internet enabled. But it's a completely different discussion to take your back office, mission critical, the stuff that actually keeps the business running, and then move that to the cloud. So we often see clients will make different decisions on who their cloud provider is, depending on whether they're, deploying, let's say, an internet-based application versus when they're deploying their most, data, corporate data sensitive and business process workloads into the cloud. And then there are clouds that do things that where sometimes, for instance, when you choose Concur, you may not have a choice of what cloud platform you are running on, as well as other applications. The choice of cloud platform is often dictated, right, by the software vendor. Then there's also, these data platforms, right, such as Red Hat OpenShift and SUSE Rancher and VMware VCF. This idea where you can develop your cloud native applications once and then deploy them to any cloud. Is another perspective in this arena. And then, like I said earlier, is there's always going to be probably some level of applications which remain on-prem, legacy applications which need to integrate right to this cloud environment. So you end up where it's best to start from the beginning, assuming that you will have this hybrid multi-cloud environment, and knowing that you have to manage, right, not across just on-prem in one cloud, but you have to manage your applications and your solutions and your business across on-prem and multiple clouds. So the first deployment choice, right? Deployment choice number one is choosing your application cloud provider. So obviously we can still run SAP on-premise or in a hosted environment. But outside of, if you're not going to run on-premise, then if you're going to run in the cloud, well, then the first thing that you have to do is choose which cloud is the best cloud for your needs. So the main choices right now in the Americas as well as in Europe is IBM Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. But the other thing that that is also being put into perspective is that most clients are not just doing a lift and shift, right, from on-prem into the cloud environment. Most customers are actually using the cloud as the platform where they are doing their S/4HANA migration, moving from the ECC platform to the S/4HANA platform, by the 2027 or 2030 deadline. But in that context, it turns out that that also drives a lot of change as well. So in addition to the change of running your business on-prem to running your business in the cloud, there's also a significant amount of change because all of the previous operating systems, right, OS 400, Solaris, Microsoft Windows, HP UX, AIX, none of those operating systems are now supported for the HANA database, right? So you have to move right to to the Linux platform, right? Either SUSE Linux or a Red Hat Linux, right, for running HANA database workloads, as well as the application, as well as the database that used to run SAP on top of Oracle and DB2 and Microsoft SQL Server, et cetera. Those databases all need to be converted, right, to the HANA database for SAP HANA to run. So one of the things that we often recommend, one of the key, best practice takeaways is that even if you aren't moving to the cloud, let's say, for another 3 years, for example, what we recommend is that if you have any end of life situations in your environment, if you're spending money on-prem of your existing systems, we recommend moving as much as possible, on-prem if you are actually doing any kind of migration or, putting in new hardware, et cetera. We recommend running as much of your on-prem environment in the interim the same way as you would be running your environment if you were running in the cloud. So as much as you can move to the Linux platform now, even if you are actually staying on-prem, actually be to your benefit. As much of the workload that you can virtualize now on-prem before moving to cloud is definitely to your benefit, right? As much as you can move from old database platforms to the new HANA database platform, even if that means running ECC on top of, or Suite on HANA on top of the HANA database without actually doing a functional transformation to S4, we would recommend doing that database transition again if you already have some type of a change event, right, in play prior to you move to cloud. If you don't have a change event in play, then it probably doesn't make sense to do these technical migrations, right? Just for the sake of actually getting closer. So the next piece of the slide is the next choice is then choosing which cloud platform do you select. One of the things I want to point out that is extremely useful is rather than logging into Google and clicking on their SAP links and logging into Amazon and seeing their options, logging into IBM Cloud, seeing IBM Cloud's options, etc. What I would highly recommend is using the SAP Certified HANA directory, which is just a fantastic resource, right? It takes out all of the marketing and it gives you a factual list of exactly what server configurations are SAP certified, right, for running SAP in the cloud. And the other great thing about the tool is that you can filter based on vendor, IBM, AWS, GCP, Azure. You can filter on how much memory, what your HANA database or memory size is. You can filter, based on, almost any of the criteria that you see on this page, as well as see what platforms are designed for, SAP transactional workloads, OLTP, versus SAP analytical workloads, right? Or OLAP workloads. So just a fantastic resource and, a very factual, list of what's available out there in the market. So deployment choice number 2 is to choose your cloud privacy model. This is probably an area where I currently see the most confusion in the industry today. And it's really concerning because I believe that every IT organization are really stewards, right, of that organization's data, right? And they have a responsibility to ensure, right, the data privacy and the security of that data. So understanding the cloud privacy model is just of utmost importance. Is just fantastically important to understand exactly where your data is going, right, when it moves into the cloud. What I recommend, the 3 things that I recommend that you should be asking questions about when you're thinking about moving your SAP, most data sensitive, mission critical workloads to the cloud is the key words are really multi-tenancy and single tenancy, right? So there's you can talk about single tenancy and multi-tenancy from an SAP application perspective, right? So multi-tenant SAP would actually be running multiple SAP customers on a single instance of SAP, right? With different company codes as an example. An example of single tenant SAP, right, would be actually running S/4HANA, where obviously, one customer runs on that instance of SAP HANA at a time. But then on the cloud perspective, there's also a single tenancy and a multi-tenancy discussion that happens in cloud environments. most clouds that you see today, most of what's running on all of the hyperscalers today are multi-tenant solutions. And what that means is by multi-tenant is when you shut your virtual machine down and you start it back up again, you may be running on a completely different server than when you actually shut it down. In addition, your virtual machine is running side by side with hundreds, if not thousands, of other, cloud customers. Effectively, anybody with a credit card could actually be running any executable that they want, right, in the virtual machine right next to your virtual machine. So the three components that it's important to understand, I just talked about compute. So obviously compute, whether it's single tenant or multi-tenant, is an important topic. But the other topic is your network hardware, whether your network hardware in the cloud is single tenant or multi-tenant. And then finally, your storage, right? Knowing if your storage assets are either single tenant or multi-tenant within that private cloud. So and there are multiple ways of actually enabling private cloud, which actually further makes this discussion confusing, right? So one way to do a private cloud is you can actually, within a public cloud data center, you can actually segregate off sort of, if you think of like a pod or an island, right, of equipment within that public cloud, right? So now you can actually run a private cloud within that public cloud, where now a client's VMs are running side by side only with that client's other VMs, right? They're not running side by side with just anybody who happens to be, a cloud customer in that particular cloud, as well as the networking and the storage environment, right? So that's one type of private cloud infrastructure. Another type of private cloud infrastructure is where you run inside of a public cloud, a fully public multi-tenant cloud, but there's another technology that's available, right? So this is part of, just as an example, this is what IBM offers, right? In our IBM Cloud for Financial Services, is we run in a public cloud, but we provide this security compliance dashboard where we have over 200 security controls. Those security controls are things like, have you enabled encryption at rest? Have you enabled encryption in transit, right? Have you enabled in your SAP, configuration, two-factor authentication, right? And do you mandate two-factor authentication, X number of days? And the idea being is that if you actually have a dashboard, and you then actually have confirmation, right, from an audit and a regulatory perspective, you have confirmation that yes, this environment actually conforms to these 200 different regulatory controls, right, or security controls. Then actually, even at that point, even if you're a bank or a financial services company, it's now okay to actually run that SAP workload, right, in a true public cloud multi-tenant environment. But without that dashboard, it's almost impossible to guarantee that those security controls are in place. It's almost impossible to actually satisfy, auditors and regulators. And it's almost likely that without that kind of a dashboard, you would likely have something, of those 200 controls, something would be out of place in your data, right? If even just one thing is out of place, your data is now potentially exposed, right? So that's the other type of private cloud. And again, I would say is, IBM tries to be a beacon of truth, around this topic and helping customers understand these choices and what the options are, and as well as, what are the cost ramifications of these different choices. So deployment choice number 3 is choosing your cloud virtualization model. I have a picture up here around VMware, but the reality is that I don't want this slide to be about VMware. So there's something specific that I want to cover in regard to VMware, but the reality is that so I read one statistic, right, where I believe, I think it was actually from VMware, that 70% of existing SAP workloads, right, running on premise are running on top of VMware. However, when you move to the cloud, most of the clients that I have worked with seem to actually be of a bias where they want to move away from VMware when they move into the cloud. And every cloud provider also typically wants you to run on their specific VM platform, right? Whether that be based on a Linux VM or Microsoft's hypervisor or what have you. So IBM Cloud is no different in that. IBM Cloud, we have our own, cloud native VM, as well as, Azure has theirs and Google has theirs and Amazon has theirs, and every cloud provider, when, given the opportunity, would prefer you to use their native virtualization stack. But that also means that also requires a lot of migration costs, right? To actually change their virtualization stack if you're moving from on-prem, let's say a VMware environment, right, into a completely different virtualization stack, right? Not only is there change, but you have to redo a lot of the performance testing as well. So the reason why I've got this VMware chart up here is I did also want to just point out that there is one alternative out there in the industry for clients who might want to consider just doing a straight lift and shift and take their existing VMware workloads on-prem and simply literally vMotion those workloads, right, from on-prem to the cloud. And, using additional VMware technology, such as HCX and NSX, there's even the ability where not only can you actually vMotion those workloads, from on-prem to cloud, or even back from cloud to on-prem, but you don't even need to change the IP address, right? The network address of those workloads, as well as if that SAP environment was integrated to, let's say, 300 different systems, you don't have to go into those 300 systems and change the IP address of the integration software from those systems, right, into the SAP system. And what that means is that you could actually cut your migration and your SAP testing costs by millions of dollars, right, by actually minimizing the amount of change of actually, vMotioning your workloads, right, from on-prem to the cloud. As of today, IBM Cloud is the only cloud provider that has VMware, SAP certified VMware as an option. So IBM Cloud, we have our native virtualization capability, but we're really the only major cloud provider in the industry who is also very, very partnered, right, with VMware in providing customers the option where if they don't want to use our native virtualization stack, they could actually choose to keep their VMware virtualization stack and then provide that drag and drop, move workloads back and forth between on-prem and cloud. Other cloud providers let you run SAP development and SAP test workloads on VMware, but they don't support it's the production workloads that are that require SAP certification. So shifting to deployment choice number 4, and that is choose your S/4HANA hardware platform. So obviously, clients have always had the option to choose between, Intel x86 and IBM Power within their on-prem data centers. What I would say about Power is that Power becomes a lot more interesting even more now in the world of S4 HANA than it did back when it was SAP, ECC, and CRM and APO and supply chain management applications running on top of any database, right? Whether that be DB2 or Oracle or Sybase or Microsoft SQL Server, et cetera. And the reason being is because Intel does not develop both, the hardware, the operating system, and the virtualization stack, right? And because Intel doesn't develop all three of those components, well, the reality is that the HANA database is an in-memory database. The HANA database really requires, a contiguous, section of memory for as large as your database is, right? So if you need 4 TB, if you need a 4 TB database, you need something a little bit larger than a 4 TB server. If you need a 12 TB database, you need something that can support more than 12 TB of memory. And so the problem, though, is that when you start getting above 4 TB, and you actually include virtualization on the Intel platform, you'll find that you start running into significant performance issues and reliability issues. I was just literally met with a client a couple of months ago, and where they said they tried everything they could to get their new SAP HANA environment actually running on a virtualized this was actually in a hosted data center, so more like on-prem. But no matter what they tried, they could not actually get it to be reliable. It kept on suffering outages. It wasn't until they went to bare metal on the Intel platform that they were able to then actually finally get the environment to be reliable. So on the flip side of that, though, in the IBM Power world, well, IBM produces the hardware, the operating system. Well, actually, if it's Red Hat, right? But we also support SUSE on Power, and we also manage the virtualization stack as well. Because we do that, the Power platform does not have any limitations, right? Everything we do on Power is virtualized, right? That means you can take an image of anything. That means that you have tools, and you can tweak up the amount of CPU cores. You can tweak up or down the amount of memory, right? You can have your application servers and your database. You can have multiple application servers and multiple databases running on a single Power machine, right? And leveraging the network backbone of that Power machine for fantastic, low latency network throughput between application server and database. So in an on-premise world, I'm finding that customers aren't very, it's not that big of a deal to have to shift just their HANA database from a virtualized stack to a bare metal stack. Where that becomes more problematic is when you run into that, performance limitation of 4 TB in the cloud. Because if you start running bare metal in the cloud, well, you lose 70%, 80%, 90% of all the benefits of running in the cloud in the first place, right? The benefits of cloud is that you can, shut down your machine and, turn it off and not pay for it. Well, if it turns out that if you're running on bare metal, that means that you have a dedicated machine. That means that you're paying for that machine whether you're using it or whether you're not, right? As well as that SAP installation is now tied specifically to that machine. It's tied to the network cards in the machine. It's tied into the specific memory installed into that machine. It's tied into the specific CPU architecture installed into that machine. It is, explicitly tied to that machine. Whereas with a virtualized environment, you can take your entire SAP installation, you can package it up into a single file, and you can move that file to any, to another machine, to another cloud, to another place, right? Complete ability and flexibility. So this becomes really important, right? And like I said before, I think it's important for customers to run on-prem today, how they're going to run in the cloud, right? So if it's not going to be okay for you to run on bare metal in the cloud, and you're actually, let's say, upgrading your SAP HANA environment today, and today you have to go to bare metal because of the limitations, right, of the size of HANA database supported on Intel with virtualization. Well, that would be a good time, I would say, to actually consider running a different hardware platform on-prem, so that way, when you do actually decide to migrate into the cloud, you can just move, right, that virtual machine from on-prem into the cloud. Okay. Deployment choice number 5 is choosing your SAP S/4HANA operating system. So the choice is easy. SAP HANA only supports 2 operating systems, and I'm not saying it only supports 2 operating systems for Linux. I mean, SAP HANA only supports Linux, and of the Linux platform, it only supports SUSE and Red Hat. And it's because of this, why I say that Linux, I believe, is becoming, the business, the operating system for business, right? It's becoming the preferred use for business workloads. I have even heard that even right now, and I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that even in Microsoft Azure, they're currently running more Linux, right, in Azure, than any other platform. So there are 2 choices, SUSE and Red Hat. Obviously, what's here are some of the choices, why clients choose RHEL. I can also share with you that IBM supports both SUSE and Red Hat, right? From a cloud perspective, from a power perspective, from a SAP application management perspective, from an SAP implementation perspective, right? We support both operating systems and are also willing to help customers figure out, what is in their best interest. What is interesting, some of the points on this slide, what is interesting is that when IBM acquired Red Hat, one of the reasons why IBM acquired Red Hat was because it had roughly 70% of the paid Linux market share, right? And if you consider, again, Linux becoming the business operating system of choice, right, then that means that the acquisition gave IBM 70% of the business operating system. What's unusual is that a lot of the SAP software application suite, such as some of the acquisitions like around Hybris and SAP Concur and Fieldglass, and Ariba and SuccessFactors, etc. A lot of those platforms also run on Red Hat. But what is unusual is that the SAP HANA database itself was initially developed on the SUSE platform. So because of that, today, there's actually a much larger market share of SAP HANA on the SUSE platform than there is with Red Hat. But that imbalance, I think, is actually coming closer to the overall worldwide, paid Linux market share, right? Where we are starting to see that balance, back out more towards a 50-50% split, right, between the 2 operating systems of choice for SAP HANA. And then other things to look at when you're choosing your operating system is things such as extended updates, completeness of the portfolio, right? You don't only want to look at just Red Hat Linux. You want to look at, the virtualization stack, right? Red Hat virtualization versus, Red Hat's hypervisor versus SUSE's hypervisor. You want to look at the graphical management and automation capabilities, right? Ansible. Is there a global repository of SAP automation scripts available, right? Depending on the operating system that you pick. You want to look at application integration platform, specifically for open integration solutions. And then finally, you want to look at the cloud native DevOps platform, right? So for Red Hat, that would be OpenShift, and for SUSE, that would be that would be Rancher, right? And you want to look at what is best in breed and what is market share, right? For these cloud native, develop once, run anywhere DevOps platforms, right? That are suitable for Fortune 2000 companies. Last deployment choice. Deployment choice number 5. Actually, excuse me, second last deployment choice number 5 is the application customization and extension model. So a lot of clients are struggling to move to SAP S/4HANA. And the reason being is because one of the great things about SAP is also one of the challenging things about SAP when it comes to migration. And that is, with SAP, you get all of the ABAP source code, right? The downside of having all access to all the ABAP source code is that a lot of SAP implementers, to meet business requirements, they would obviously, a business would say, well, that's not how I want to run my business. I want to run my business like this. And what would often happen is, consultants would go into SAP, they would make a copy of that ABAP program, and then they would modify that ABAP program to do exactly what the business user wanted SAP to do and behave. They also tended to modify the SAP underlying database tables, right? Adding columns, to the database table. The problem with that is that, when SAP actually goes through a generational shift, right? A generational upgrade, as an example, from SAP Business Suite to SAP S/4HANA, SAP makes so many changes that it becomes impossible to resolve. Let's say you have hundreds of ABAP and database table code changes. It becomes impossible to resolve all of your code changes with all the code changes that SAP made, right? In the next generation release of product, right? So often it becomes difficult then to justify the expense of migrating to SAP S/4HANA, to make sure that there's actually return on investment for that expense. So in any case, most clients are deciding to actually make that migration, but in the process, they're also asking the question, well, how do I move to S4, how do I re-implement on top of SAP S/4HANA, right? How do I move to SAP S/4HANA, but also protect myself again from not being able to move to the next generation release of SAP? And the answer to that is is this idea of keeping a clean digital core, right? So basically leaving the left side of the equation, the SAP, digital core component, leaving the left side as unmodified as possible, not making ABAP code changes on the left-hand side, not making database, table changes on the left side. The idea is to instead house your SAP customizations on a cloud native development platform, right? So that way you can keep the left side as clean as possible. In addition, the left side of SAP is not a containerized application yet, right? So the left side continues to run on just a Linux operating system with an optional hypervisor, right? Or on top of bare metal. Whereas the right side is more futuristic, right? Where you run SAP's cloud native DevOps platform, business technology platform, or where you run your enterprise-wide cloud DevOps platform, let's say OpenShift, right, or SUSE Rancher, um, those are all cloud native platforms. They're all Kubernetes enabled. They all have the ability where you can develop once and then deploy, to any cloud. And it also gives you that, the ability to scale up. With SAP's BTP platform, you can even write ABAP code. You can make database table changes on the right-hand side and just simply integrate it right back into the left-hand side of the equation. And another thing to point out here that's differentiating is that today, BTP does not have an on-premise deployment option. And also BTP typically tends to run on public cloud, multi-tenant infrastructure, right? So there's also some data privacy and security concerns that come with BTP as well. Whereas on the right-hand side, such as OpenShift, which is what you see here, OpenShift today is already used by over roughly half of the Fortune 500 as their enterprise-wide cloud DevOps platform. But the other neat thing about OpenShift is that OpenShift not only already is available on Azure and AWS and Google and IBM Cloud, but OpenShift is also available to run on-premise. And what that means is that if you build an SAP extension on OpenShift, you now have the flexibility of actually securing it from a privacy perspective, as well as the ability to actually deploy that extension either on-prem or to any major cloud platform, which is a significant advantage. I would say that most companies will not run either BTP or OpenShift. Most companies will end up running both SAP BTP, right, for very SAP centric extensions, as well as their own enterprise standard for a cloud DevOps platform such as OpenShift, right? And we'll have like a flow chart of when to use which, right? For the particular extension or workload in question. And then finally, how can IBM help? I actually think one of the best ways that IBM can help is through this IBM Rapid Discovery. Even if you are not planning to do an S/4HANA or a cloud migration, let's say you're still 2 years, even 3 years away from doing an S/4HANA or a cloud migration, I actually believe it is in everybody's best interest to use some of these really awesome tools that are out there, right? So SAP provides tooling such as Early Watch. There's a company out there called S&P Crystal Bridge that IBM actually prepays, for this tool for lots of our customers that can actually do a deep analysis of your data environment and how much change will be impacted for your existing data to move to SAP S/4HANA, as well as IBM. We have our own tools where we can literally sit on a single machine, and that machine can actually reach into SAP. One of the greatest things about SAP is the statistics that SAP keeps. But SAP throws those statistics away, right? It can't keep those statistics forever. So we actually have software which can, log into these SAP systems and actually collect all these statistics about, how many of your ABAP transactions have been customized that you run every day. What ABAP transactions are you running the most? What are your peak memory usages? What are your peak CPU usages, right? How customized are your SAP servers, right? We can pull all of this information from multiple SAP systems over a span of several days, right? Over, let's say, normal running conditions, maybe over a quarter and, books close type of transactions, over peak workloads, things of that nature, and then be able to look at that data and begin to understand, how much of an impact it will be to actually move to S/4HANA, right? So I believe before any company consider moving to S/4HANA, they need to fully understand their existing SAP environment. And they need to fully understand exactly what they have today before they can even think about drawing a roadmap for their migration to either S4 or to the cloud, right? So from IBM's perspective, right, the offering that we lead with, right, to do that is this IBM Rapid Discovery. And with that, I could not see the Q&A, so I will actually stop sharing right now so I can go back to the Q&A screen. And Laura, let me check back with you to see if you saw any Q&A questions.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. No, I haven't seen any question today. So I guess your presentation was very clear to the point where nobody had questions. Thank you very much, Michael. That concludes today's session. And thank you all for attending. We hope that it provided you with valuable insights and that you enjoyed the rest of your event experience. And also, please remember to complete the session evaluation at the end of this session. We thank you very much, and we hope you're going to have a great day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.